Good morning. We are going to get started just with 2 Peter. I believe we're picking up in verse 14 is where we're going to start our reading. So if you want to flip to that now. And we're going to open up in prayer first. Why don't you start praying? Lord, thank you for the time as your children to gather together and take your word into our hearts. Let it guide our discussion here. Let it put a spark in our spirits for when we leave. Let it change us, Lord. Be with those this morning who are not with us. Let your word be in their heart. Be with those who are suffering right now in our church family. Give them support through your spirit and through us. In Christ's name, amen. All right, so I'm going to recap a little bit. I'm going to say a few things about the false teacher stuff that we kind of went over last week. And we're going to go into verse 14. The main reason why is some clarification stuff. I wanted to go into, because there's some good discussions of the idea of false teachers, and really kind of led into some really good discussions. We didn't get far, but I wanted to say a few things because I think there's some stuff to kind of go through. So false teachers, and I'm going to go ahead and use what we're told in God's word. Because if we want to be aware of false teachers, we need to kind of see what advice was given to the church to be aware of. And in 1 John 4:1, it says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." So there's two things, and Rodney brought this up last week about even we need to know the word in our hearts. It's our job, it's my job, it's your job as Christians to have God's word written in our hearts, so when we are hearing teaching, we can determine, is it of God or is it not of God? And so this, I thought, took care of a lot of things with, we do have a responsibility when it comes to being aware of what people are saying about God's word and not God's word. We have to be in it, so that way we can put it next to it and go, is this godly? So that one's there. And then you also have, it's a long one in John 7:15-20, where it says, "Watch out for false prophets. They'll come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ferocious wolves." But if you keep reading about it, it kind of talks about what we see the fruits of false teachers are. And in a way, it kind of says, do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. And so it kind of talks about what false teachers will create in that way. So false teachers, we're going to kind of look at it as, it's not just one statement somebody says wrong. These people in 2 Peter's addressing, these people are actually trying to pervert and manipulate God's word. They're trying to change it from what they were taught from before. And it's being purposefully done. It's not misspoken. It's not someone saying, hey, I think this verse says this when it really doesn't say this, or I think the prophets are meaning this, and they go, well, I guess I was wrong, and they correct themselves, and they realize they made a mistake. It's not one thing. It is people who are actually trying to manipulate and take people away from Christ. And someone brought, and this was a little bit bothering me all week, so this is my feelings. We kind of talk about Peter and Paul. And I was thinking about this all week, and it's in Galatians 2:11, and it talks about when Paul confronted Peter. And we were kind of discussing, okay, was Peter false teaching at that moment? But this is my conclusion is, if you read it, and I went through it, I read it, and I thought about it, is the verse, when I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel. Peter, when Peter was not sitting with the Gentiles and trying to sit with the Jews and ignoring them, it was an action. He wasn't publicly teaching what was, hey, you can't sit here, you can't do it. He was acting a certain way. And so I consider it as a publicly sinned is what Peter did. It will have, and it did have some influences to other people's beliefs. But I do think Peter learned his lesson from Paul. And we can even say he did because we see it in his letters that he learned his lesson, that he now understands what he did. And so I don't think, my conclusion, I don't think Peter was false teaching. I think he did what we did, what we do. We sin.
He's kind of being a hypocrite.
Yeah. And so I look at it as it was a public sin, and just like when we commit sins in public, there are influences that it will affect the way people see God. And Peter, I believe, acknowledged it and moved forward. So that one was sticking with me, and when I read that verse, I said 14a, it's the first part of 14, not acting in line. That word acting kind of stuck out to me on what it was. But keep in mind for this lesson, false teachers that Peter's addressing are intentionally trying to manipulate the people in the church, in the early church that Peter is writing to. And it's a continual manipulation, trying to change the word. All right, so we are going to start, verse 4. Wow, not 14. It did have a 4 in it, though. Can someone read verses 4 through 12 for us, please? Yeah, go ahead.
4 through 12.
Yep.
For if God spared not the angels that sinned, that cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and he spared not the old world, but saved Noah, a person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example unto those that after should live ungodly, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptation, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. But chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness, and despise government. Presumptuous are they, self-willed, they are not afraid to speak evil of dignities. Whereas angels, which are greater in power and might, bring not railing accusation against them before the Lord. But these, as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption.
Thank you. So the first part is kind of a little bit of review, and we talked about it last week, saying God does not let sin go unpunished in any way. And we talked about how we were provided a way back to God when the angels who sinned against him were not. But the main thing, and we're going to start in verse 10b, the beginning of the paragraph, at least my translation, NIV says bold and arrogant. That's really what the hearts of false teachers deal with. They're bold and they're arrogant. They're coarse, they're insolent, they're hardened. They don't really follow God's word. They're trying to manipulate. There might be some little ego inside of them. The one thing too is they're not afraid. They're unrestrained. My thing with this is when it says, at least I'll ask this, is when it says not afraid to heap abuse on celestial beings. What do you think that means? So bold and arrogant, they are not afraid to heap abuse on celestial beings. That was a hard one for me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's spiritual warfare. So, I mean, if we're fighting against, demons or anything like that, then you're fighting against a celestial being. That's kind of my thought.
Yeah, there's a spiritual warfare going on. Now, yeah.
Well, if you look at Jude, it does mention that again, and it says that Michael, when contending with the devil, even he didn't dare bring a slanderous accusation, but he said, the Lord rebuke you. I think it's about maybe just knowing some battles are God's.
Yeah, and I looked at this, and I thought about this one a lot because you're dealing with those stuff. But I also go through is if they're bold and they're arrogant, these false teachers, they're unrestrained, it says. If they are putting not afraid to abuse on celestial beings, heap abuse on them. When I sin, whose fault is it? It's mine. Now, could I be tempted in some way, some spiritual warfare, tempted by Satan? Could I be tempted by any evil desires? I could be tempted. The temptation is there, but the fault lies on me. My sins are my fault. And so I'm looking at this, and I was going through and studying this, and some of it is, you hear people say, well, the sin is because I was being tempted by this. Be very careful on that, because I was being tempted by this, but I sinned. I'm the one who did it. It was not the demons who caused me to sin. It was not Satan who caused me to sin. I fell into the trap. I fell into the bait. So when we and this is one thing I was going through, I hear people say it, and I'm sure I've said it before, and reading this kind of caused me to kind of take a step back and look at myself and go, okay, so if I sin, I should be very careful how I sin it. I shouldn't say, well, I was tempted by Satan or tempted by the... I gave into a temptation, is what happened. I gave into the sin. The fault lies with me. It is not lying with Satan in that kind of sense. But they're talking about celestial beings and heaping abuse on them. And like Bethany said, and it says on here, the angels didn't rebuke and say, you're sinning, Satan. They performed God's will and left the judgment for him. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Celestial beings does seem to be unique to NIV. I think I've seen a couple different things in different translations.
What do you see?
ESV is glorious ones. King James is dignities. And the King James is going to be generally a very literal translation. So it may be talking less about actual beings and more not esteeming the things which are to be esteemed highly, treating those as mockeries.
Just can you repeat that last part?
The things which are to be held in high esteem, the things that are to be dignified, glorified, respected, they are treating those things as a mockery. It may be more general than celestial ones. I don't know.
Okay. I lean towards, the reason why I lean towards the angels is when the verse continues.
Yes.
It goes into yet even the angels, although they are stronger, more powerful, do not heap abuse on much powerful beings. And that's, Bethany, did you look at Jude 1:8? Is that where you got that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't fear Satan because God is mightier, but not because I'm mightier. It's just that the God I serve is protecting me, and he's taking that battle. And it sounds like anyone that's wanting to go up against Satan solo has got a pretty arrogant mindset.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Go up against Satan and say, I can do this on my own without God. Can someone read Jude 1:8?
Likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries.
Mine was a lot longer than that. Read it again. Jude 8?
You said Jude chapter 1, verse 8, right?
Yep.
Likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries.
That's like a nice, concise one. Mine's like 4 lines. And the very same way, on the strength of their dreams, these ungodly people pollute their own bodies, reject authority, and heap abuse on celestial beings. Which translation are you using?
Under King James.
Okay. No, that was very concise. That's like trying to follow it along, and it's like, wow. Using NIV. But the idea is, and if you looked at the handout, it was you have Jude is a letter. If you want to read 2 Peter and this part with false teachers, read Jude at the same time. because you're going to see a lot of overlapping when it comes to what it is, and you might see a little bit more depth in Jude. If Peter says something short, Jude might have a few more sentences. If Jude says something short, Peter might have gone into it. So they also play the blame game. I kind of said they don't take ownership of their sins. My question I kind of put on the handout is, where do motivations and desires of false teachers come from? So where do you think the motivation and the desires of false teachers come from? Themselves? Selfishness? Greed? I think I wrote down, and you can see this as ego. Yeah.
Knowledge, they really don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
They don't know what they don't know. So it doesn't come from truth, his truth, God's truth. It doesn't come from God's truth. There's some internal desire, internal motivation that is going to lead them away. Do they know God's truth? In some way, do you think false teachers know God's truth? Yes, but what have they chosen to do? Take God's truth and slowly start bringing in something from the outside here. Start bringing in something from the outside here. Start bringing in something from the outside, and they start manipulating or perverting and changing God's truth. You had a question? Comment?
A little bit of a comment. I think we're still dealing with the 1st century, 2nd century Christians, and I think they're dealing with a time-honored religion. In Judaism and switching over to Christianity. And so some of the doctrine is, some people want to go back to Judaism. And the writers Paul and other writers are saying, listen, Christ is not in the temple anymore. You know, he's not there. Whatever you're trying to teach about that, you can't go back to that. And so I think in some areas where we're reading, it's a time-honored religion. They're having a hard time switching over to this new system of Christ being the high priest instead of having the many priests. It's just one priest now. The sin problem has been solved once and for all, and they want to go back to another system where God is not there anymore. And so I see the struggle there with a time-honored religion with 1st generation, 2nd generation of Christians. And so he's saying, you know, you're not using all the scriptures properly. You're looking at this old teaching, and it's causing confusion amongst what Christ is teaching.
I think when it comes to the Jewish Christians, or along that line, is when you have the Gentile Christians who come from a Greek background, they're being manipulated by some religions that are, you have Gnosticism and all the other religions where they're being manipulated that knowledge is truth. Knowledge is the way, not Jesus is the way. And so Jewish Christians are probably they're probably trying to slow people, try and manipulate, go here, like when we had the circumcision problems in the New Testament about should Jewish Christians be circumcised or not. Sorry, new Christians be circumcised like Jewish ones. But you also have teachings that they're battling in these areas from their cultural views, trying to find their way in because they're trying to live in a world that they're not trying to be part of. So I think you have the Jewish aspect and you have the Gentile aspect with the teachings. The last part, hearts of animals. They have hearts of animals when they go through it. It says, they are like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed, and like animals, they too will perish. They judge things according to their senses, the way they feel things, not by God's truth, is what that's saying. So when they're making statements, they're not saying, going looking at it and putting it next to, like the 1 John verses we looked at the beginning, they're not putting next to God's word. They're looking at it like animals. They're trying to see how does it make them feel, how does it react to their personal instinct, and it's more based off of our desires, our motivation. How do I feel? And it's not based off of how am I supposed to feel in God's word. It does, as you're not putting it next to God's word and clarifying it. You're comparing it to yourselves to go through. And I have written down to, how does this relate to Jude 1:10? So if I look at Jude 10, yet these people slander whatever they do not understand, and the very things they do understand by instinct, as irrational animals do, will destroy them. So the hearts of false teachers are based off of their creature desires. Anybody have any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, even going back to verse 7, talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, then it talks about giving themselves over to sexual immorality. Same thing that goes along with verse 10. And we have that same, whether it be 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, or today, we have that same philosophy going on today. Well, they're born that way, they're this or that, and we can't help ourselves. And kind of the brute beast mentality and so forth and so on. And it's not like Jesus showed us examples, we're to have compassion for those who are repentant of their sins, like the adulterous woman or the woman who washes his feet with her hair and tears, dried them with her hair. Forgive them, because they're changing. They understand what the truth is. These people are deliberately ignoring the truth that God has given them and giving themselves over to their own desires.
Yeah, it's a deliberate action.
Right.
Very well said. I wrote down, just like how animals follow their instincts, a sinful man follows the desires of his carnal mind. If you think about when I sin, I am following my desires. I'm not following God's desires for me. Just like an animal follows, if they're hungry, they go eat. If they're tired, they sleep. They just go based off of their desires, their feelings at the time. When I sin, I am not acting of God. I'm acting of my desires, just like an animal would. So our sinning, as the animal would say, is our carnal desires in this case when it's going through. Any other comments?
One of the qualities of a leader, a shepherd in the church, is to be spiritually minded. I think that would be the opposite of what we're talking about. So rather than thinking about things that always have to do with self-gratification or the temporal desires that people have or that they might have, they're thinking about the long haul. They're thinking about eternal things. They're thinking about the spiritual well-being of people in here. And so it has to be an outward concern that they have to do that. Not self-directed.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think with false teachers, what makes it so much worse is that they're claiming to be religious. And we see it in the world all the time, people who claim to be religious, yet do not see God's truth as authority. As we've been talking about. And so it's one thing to be sinful and not claim to be religious or claim to believe in God. It's another thing when you are hypocritical about it, and it does a lot more damage, and was really something that Jesus condemned as well. He didn't condemn a lot of people, but he did condemn those who claimed to be religious but were not. They did not have the heart of someone who was godly.
Yeah, and Peter's trying to warn them. This is a second letter to these people, and if you even go to chapter 3 and read through it, he's got a love for these people, just like when Paul writes and has love for the churches that he visits. Peter has a love for these people. He's concerned about what's happening there. He's trying to pull them back to what they learned before and help them. Otherwise, the repercussions, someone else can believe a false teaching and spread it along the lines. Can someone read 13 through 16? Yeah.
Suffering wrong as the wage for their wrongdoing, they count it pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are blots and blemishes, reveling in their deceptions while they feast with you. They have eyes full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. They have hearts trained in greed. Accursed children, forsaking the right way, they have gone astray. They have found the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing, but was rebuked for his own transgression. A speechless donkey spoke with human voice and restrained the prophet's madness.
So this one, for verse 13, said the false teachers boastfully display their actions. They rely on personal instinct and desire, and we talked about that. They openly, they could openly display their sinful pleasures and indulgences with no remorse. Now, that might not be from a speaking standpoint, a pulpit standpoint, but when they're with other people, you can see their actions and their behaviors. They're not trying to be like Christ. They're just keeping the way they are. Where the false teachers, they might be in sin still, and they're just displaying that sinful life. So if people know they're a teacher and they're displaying this sinful life, or they're trying to go through, it's kind of saying, hey, this is okay, this is acceptable. I looked at too is, if you think about just sinning, to gain greater pleasure, because they're indulging their senses. They're going to go deeper and deeper into a sin in some way. Either one sin or grab. So they're going to continually sin and seduce those without a firm foundation on it, but they're going to just go deeper into what they were doing. And they're going to keep on, if they're sinning, they're going to keep on grabbing things and sin more. And what happens is they're going to slowly kind of look like they're condoning something that is not from God. And I have a question is, what harm against themselves, and I wrote down against others, are done by these false teachers? So in this church, you put a perspective is, in this church Peter's writing to, what harm is going to be done to these false teachers and to those who are listening to them?
Eternity. That's the ultimate end.
Because
The false teaching.
the false teaching. Are they going to change their ways?
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes you can be a false teacher, and I know it, like Apollos.
Yeah.
Apollos taught improperly John the Baptist until he was told differently by Aquila and Priscilla, if you remember Acts 19. So it changed. So these fellows they can change if they choose.
Yeah, these ones are not choosing to change like they've done before. What else? Yeah.
I think sin is contagious. And so as the teacher continues to spread his teaching, it's not going to produce any fruit in a person's life. Probably produce weeds and eventually a dead person that's walking, probably a spiritually zombie person that has no joy, no happiness, and they don't understand Christ as God would want them to understand Christ, the Son of God.
And how contagious is it if it's coming from someone who is thought to have the knowledge that they're supposed to? So like I'm a high school math teacher. When I go and speak in a room and we're teaching something with math, my students believe and trust that I'm going to teach them the concepts properly. That I have the knowledge and the depth in mathematics to be able to teach them how to do something. So if there's someone listening to these false teachers, and you said sin is contagious, if it's coming from authority, what they would say is authority, that they might know more about the verses, how much more contagious is it, or how much more spreading happens in that sense? Because they're trusting the word from a leader, someone who they look at as a leader, the authority of that word. They're trusting it, and so they're going to take it in more, and which we talked about in the 1 John, is if they don't compare it to God's word themselves, we all have that responsibility. If they don't do that, if they're new to the faith or they're easily swayed, this is going to it's going to be contagious, and it's going to start spreading and spreading and spreading. Yeah.
I was just thinking, talking about the contagiousness of sin and the false teachers and the way they present their arguments. Paul has to deal with that in the Roman congregation as well. And they had the Gnostics, and the Gnostics would say, we can't deny sin, we can't help but sin. And we can keep the letter of the law, but the physicalness of sin is all around us, and we have to give into it. And that's why Paul said in Romans 6, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound, may it never be. You don't take advantage of the grace of God. He goes on and talks about baptism, what baptism does for you, and you're raised to be like Christ and not something different. And people sometimes want to say, hey, because of my physical nature, I cannot help but give in to the fleshly desires.
Yeah, which is taking one part and leaving the other part out
Yeah.
of it, yeah. But the bottom line is, and Richard, you said this, is their conclusion is made. They're going to be, they know where their end is going to be judgment in some way, shape, or form. I wrote down, in destroying others, they would themselves eventually be destroyed. So by doing false teaching, they're actually kind of writing and creating their own end game of what's going to happen to them if they continue and they don't change and understand what they made.
Satan knows not only is sin contagious, but it's addictive. So once you have it, you revel in it, you want more of it.
Yeah. Dive deeper and deeper into it.
New King James says they're deceived. I think they may at one point be rebelling against authority, but come to actually believe their own teaching. Like if you tell if you teach it enough, or you tell yourself it's true enough, you actually begin to believe what you're saying. We've seen that happen, I suppose, with people, but because of that, they're set on winning people to their own way of thinking. And the ones that are vulnerable, it says, are those who are unstable. They're not sure yet what to believe, and they're attracted to those people.
Yeah.
They can see those people by hearing what people are saying. It might be the people that have a lot of questions or doubts, which normally in a setting like this should be safe. That's what we want to get questions on the table, answer questions. But these people would go and pin them down somewhere, maybe later, either there or later, and work that leaven in to those people. So there's really a strategy with the ones he's describing here in this context.
There's an evangelism aspect to what is being said, like you were talking with it. I think there's two people that Peter's addressing with this, like two types of people who could be easily manipulated. You have those who are, want to know the faith, they have questions on it, they have some doubts, they're seeking in some way, but they haven't accepted Christ yet. And these people are trying to go through, okay, maybe they start coming to church, like we'll put it in our time. Maybe they start coming to church and they have questions they're trying to go through. And these people, and I say this, these people, if you go through, if they're not the right person, the right heart, if they're not being taught the right way, if they're not going through it, if they are being shown in some way, hey, you can still live this part of your life, but here's God's word, but you don't have to give up this sin. In those ways, they're going to easily be swayed in that sense because they don't have to sacrifice anything. They don't have to go to God's word. Just keep doing that. That's okay. Just do this part here. They could be swayed by false teachings. You also have the new Christians, which is when baptized, just come out. And in that sense, they got the Spirit. They're full. They got the energy. But if you look at the responsibility of the church in that sense, we have to make sure they get that foundation completely built so they are not easily, hey, they got this fire and they're grabbed by somebody who could easily manipulate them and drag them somewhere. So you have two people who get easily swayed, people new to the faith, newly baptized, or you have those who have questions and are seeking God, but they're getting their information from the wrong people. They're getting information from wrong teaching. Verse 14, false teachers cannot stop sinning. We kind of talked about that one. is, you said it's contagious and it's addictive. And then also they entice and they seduce. So the word that's used, I can't pronounce it right, so I'm going to try, delazo, or delazo. It actually means, the Greek to it, to bait or to catch by bait. And so when I read that, you go through all 2 Peter, and we talk about all, last week and even this week is the beginning of who are false teachers, and we kind of go to the whole thing. You get to verse 14. Think on that for a second, is these people, the enticing is, or seducing, depending on your translation, means to bait or to catch by bait. So what does that make you feel? Like, think of a scenario on that is, how are these false teachers then really trying to get the people during 2 Peter's time?
Well, bait is typically something they want. Whoever you're trying to trap is something that they're enticed to, so you're giving them something they think they want.
Giving them something they think they want. But in actuality, do you fish?
It's bait.
Well, no, we know Matt fishes, right? So it's deceptive. Now, when you're fishing, there's a reason why you're casting a line, right? You're trying to catch somebody. You are trying to manipulate something. You're trying to get, in this case, maybe they're trying to get followers to what they say. But I like it. They think they want it. But when a fish bites on the bait, they're trapped. And so I like this bait. I looked at it going, there is an intentional thing happening here from both the person who's casting and the fish who's taking the bait, the person who's taking the bait. It is really trying to give them something they think they want. And by the way, why do fish take bait?
It looks good.
Yeah, it looks good. It looks like what they want to eat. So there's a little bit of, it's fake. It looks like something. It looks like it's a worm. It looks like it's food for them. It looks like an insect. And so they grab it. They don't stop, at least I don't look down there and go, they don't stop and look at it from all the different angles and stuff like that, but they see it and they react. Animal instinct, like Peter said. And what happens is they think they're getting fed. They think they're getting the bait, the thing that they're looking for, the thing they want. So it's one of those things where they are being deceived and they are going to be trapped by it. And this is where I talked about the believers who are easily swayed. I kind of talked about I consider those kind of, you have some new believers to the faith who they accepted Christ, they're baptized, they're ready to go, and they could easily be pulled aside. I think there's a responsibility in a church when we have new people, new believers baptized, to make sure they have a good foundation and continue to build them because, one, they're the future, and two, they're new Christians. And so we want to make sure that they have a good foundation so they're not going to be pulled away. So that's how I wrote down, like, how can this be combated? Is how can a church combat false teachings from new believers towards new believers?
You have to teach the truth. You have to ground them in the truth.
Ground them in the truth.
Hopefully they seek the truth.
The one thing I like, one thing I really enjoy about this church is I feel that people, when you hear a message, they'll always go, this is why I like the Bible studies, is people go and say, well, it says in Romans, Paul did this. You're in the Word, you're comparing what's being said to God's Word. Is getting them to realize you're baptized, but now you're going to have to get God's Word in your spirit. You're going to have to go this to compare. You have a responsibility to understand what it is that you believe. 15 to 16 false teachers compared to Balaam. You can read Numbers, we're not going to go into, but if you read Numbers 22, 21 through 39, it tells the story of Balaam. They abandoned the doctrine of Christ in some way, maybe not completely, maybe parts of it. but they don't follow the way anymore. They don't follow the path. And that made me think of the phrase, narrow is the path. But how does Peter, or how does the story, let's ask it this way, how does the story of Balaam relate to what Peter is teaching in this letter? Because these people will know, the Jews in the church should know the story of Balaam. So he's using the story to teach a lesson to people who are being in the church, might be having false teacher problems. And so he's using this story. And so if you know the story, how does the story of Balaam relate to what Peter is trying to get them to understand?
Well, I think in some sense, the relationship is that Balaam sought treasure and he wanted gain. And if these false teachers are using their position, their power of teaching to gain for themselves, right? And we see that every day. I mean, you don't have to go far to see the televangelist that says, send me a check and I'll send you a napkin and you'll heal yourself. Some other obvious way, right? But less obvious is still gain. They're seeking power or money or position or something for themselves.
Yeah, they were seeking profit for themselves, some type of gain in some way. Yeah.
I was just saying in conjunction with that, I mean, that's what Balaam did. He was told to curse the people, and he went, and instead of curse, he blessed them. And then finally, in the conversation, it was about, well, I want them cursed. Well, I can't curse them. I can only say what God tells me to say. But you can do this. You can send in your people and turn their hearts away from God, and then you would be successful in accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So this goes back to the false teaching.
And it takes a donkey to make Balaam aware. And so it's one of those things where a person in the position, Balaam, was doing wrong, looking for personal gain, and took a donkey to correct him. And I'm going to end with this, is we've talked about the different false teachers. And just like maybe what let me phrase it right. It's a broad term. And that's kind of what led to the discussion last week when we started. If we say false teachers, you can go and grab something here, and we can easily go through and be broad. So I was looking at some things, and it kind of talked about there's some different types of false teachers, and you can look at it like motivation, and we kind of brought up a couple. You brought up like some said televangelists. One thing commentary I was reading kind of called those like charlatans. They're using Christianity as a means of personal gain or enrichment. And so in that case, the story of Balaam was talking about trying to do personal gain. It's like charlatans could be false teachers in a sense. So we have to be careful. Heretics, they blatantly teach some contradiction to God's word. And so heretics will contradict God's word completely, which is why it's important we know his word and it's written on our heart. Because the only way to combat heretics is to be able to compare their teachings to what you know God says. And so we have people trying to do personal gain. We have people trying to change words. You have some people, the divider. A divider could use false doctrine to disrupt or destroy a church. And you think about what's happening to the church that Peter's writing to, that's starting to happen. Is you have something going on, and it's starting to disrupt or destroy that church. So when you think about false teachers, I say don't go into individual parts of the weeds. Focus on maybe what's happening in the letter that Peter's going into, and we'll see how it goes through and how it relates to us.
I think the term bait also means I think some of the most dangerous false teachers are ones that sprinkle truth in or have mostly truth, but with a couple of lies sprinkled in. And so it's not only knowing the truth, but it's also being able to study and discern closely sometimes. That the message has to fall with the Bible in its entirety and look for some of the ways that the lies can be sneaky.
Yeah, the most dangerous, I'd say, lies about, like you said, faith, about Christ, are the ones that have a lot of truth, and then just sprinkle in a lot of manipulation, a lot of sins in there. All right, we'll pick up verse 17, and we'll go into chapter 3 next week. Thank you.